All right, well, welcome Team ET. Thank you for joining us. And as you've heard from me in the intro for today's podcast, we've teleported all the way across to Canada. And we're joined by our guest, Miss Ash. Let me get my tongue out of my foot, Miss Ashton Rodenhiser. So, Ashton, welcome to the show. My apologies for making a mess of that introduction, but welcome to the ET project.
Hey, if that's the only thing that goes wrong today, then that's a pretty good day, right? No, I'm so happy to be with you here, Wayne, today. I've been
Yeah,
really looking forward to this chat.
yeah, thank you. It's been a while coming, I have to say, and we sort of bounced around a couple of times. I love. I think it's on LinkedIn. You call yourself a graphic recorder. And we're going to
Hmm.
unpack that a little bit more as we go through our conversation, I'm sure. But really happy to have this opportunity to, learn more about what you're doing and learn more about you, of course. But it sounds like a really fascinating area of work. So I look forward to this conversation a lot.
Yeah, when you said what my LinkedIn, I was like, ooh, what did I call myself recently? Because I feel like, when you do your own thing, you can change your title whenever you
Yeah,
want. So
no, but that's a great title, graphic recorder. So it conjures
Mhm.
up a lot of different images, and I'm sure there'll be some learning for all the listeners. Before we get into any of that, we've got to go to where you are, right? So you're sitting in the province, Canadian province called Nova Scotia. So
Right.
if I was to do a poll right now of all our listeners, I'm going to guess that the knowledge of where you are on that global map is probably pretty minimal. And to be
Hmm.
honest, full disclosure here, if I hadn't been preparing for our conversation, I would have been at the top of the list failing my geography lessons. So I wonder if we could start with a little geography lesson from you,
Oh,
if you
that's
don't mind.
fun.
Yeah, where is Nova Scotia? Where are you right now?
Yeah, so it is in the far east of Canada. It's considered to be one of the Atlantic provinces
Right.
and also makes up one of three provinces that's called the Maritimes. So you can't drive more, you don't have to drive more than an hour to hit the ocean. We're completely surrounded in water.
Hmm.
I grew up about 15 minutes from the ocean. Now I live about 30 minutes from the ocean. And if you picture a lot of US seaside um, TV shows and films are actually filmed in a lot of the communities around here because we have the very, it's by the ocean, we have the
Mm.
boats and then like the bright colorful houses.
Right.
So it's a very beautiful place to live. It has kind of like a little bit of everything and different depending on where you go in the province. There's different things like there's big hills on one side. We have the highest tides in the world on the other side. Yeah, it's a really fascinating place to live. If you love nature, we've got lots of that. We kind of joke when I had a friend visit years ago from Africa, and we just joked because we just have so many trees. Just, oh, look, some more trees. Oh, look, some more trees. So lots of fresh air here, that's for sure.
As opposed to the vast empty plains of Africa, I guess. So you've lived there all your life. That's quite incredible.
Mhm.
What
Yeah.
do you do? Like, you're married, you have children. Apart from raising children, what do you do in your leisure time in Nova Scotia? You go on the water? You go hiking? What is the activity?
Yeah. Yeah, we spend a lot of time in nature as a family. We even do the 1,000 hours outside challenge, which challenges us to get 1,000 hours outside. It is what it says.
Right.
Um, we might actually hit it this year. This is our
Yeah.
third year, and we haven't hit it yet. So we were 50 hours away last year from hitting it, and
Wow.
yeah, so we spend, in the summertime, we just live 5 minutes from a public lake swimming area. So we
Mm.
spend a lot of our time. The kids love to swim there. And, it's cold here in the wintertime, but there's really only a few weeks out of the year that you have to kind of stay inside and not really go anywhere.
Okay.
But yeah, no, for people that do boating, we're not boating people, but That's a pretty common thing for folks to do here. We have like a pretty incredible live music scene. We have a pretty good art scene. So, yeah.
Very, very nice. And pardon my ignorance, but does it snow in the mountains, in
It's,
the hills?
yeah. So where I am, it's a bit flat. I'm not where the hilly area is called the
Okay.
Cabot Trail, but it does snow. But because we're surrounded with water, we get more ice than snow the last few years. So it's, so usually if they cancel school, it's actually because of ice and not snow.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There'd just
I'm
be
not
like a thick
experienced.
layer of ice all over the roads, like no one's going anywhere.
Wow, incredible.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it must be an amazing journey. Let's look a little bit at your career journey as such, and try and understand, where did it all start for you? Did you start where you
Mhm.
are today, or were you doing something different?
Yeah, so I'll go back to high school days. So I really struggled in high school trying to decide what I wanted to be when I grew up. And like time was of the essence. It was getting close to graduation and I still had no idea. I just knew that I was probably going to do something in like the social sciences. I didn't do well in physics and chemistry. I just did enough of those science credits to graduate, but no more. But I was very smart. I actually just found I was cleaning up stuff and I found my high school transcript the other day and I was like, whoa. And I had very high marks, kind of top of the class when it came to that, but I just had no idea what I wanted to do.
Hmm.
But I had always worked with children. So I decided that I wanted to be a mother. And that wasn't very popular. That wasn't a popular path. Well, everybody's deciding what universities they want to go to. I'm like, yeah, it'd be cool to be a mom. That would be a pretty cool job. So, because I had to pay for all of my own schooling and I didn't want to get into a ton of debt, I decided to enroll in the local community college, which was a bit of a hard decision because I hope it's better now, but at the time there was a lot of stigma around community
Mm.
college. Like the not smart kids go to community college. And I had people tell me to my face, "Oh, you're so smart for someone who goes to community college." But I thought I was because, I thought I was smart making that decision because I wasn't going to go and do a bunch of schooling when I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I I decided to enroll in early childhood education because I figured I'd always worked with kids. I want to be a mom someday. This will be a useful skill to have.
Yeah.
And so when I was a 2-year program and I decided that one thing that I did consider over the years was to be a sign language interpreter, actually. So in order to get into that program, you have to take a couple prerequisite classes. So I had to go to night school for 6 months to even get into sign language school. So I decided to move to the city. And when I got there and signed up for these classes, I ended up getting a job at a nonprofit family resource center. And when I was there, I worked with kids, I worked with families. But the last 2 years I was there, I started doing a lot of facilitation work.
Okay.
And I absolutely fell in love with facilitation. I love how you can have a group of people in a room and you're just creating that safe space. You're asking the questions, you're feeding back, what you're hearing and helping them come to their own ideas and conclusions and goals and stuff. Right. So, I was like, this facilitation thing's really cool. I wonder if I can figure out a way to kind of do this more.
Yeah.
I wanted to move back home. City living isn't for me. It's still a very small city, but it's still not for me. So I wanted to move back home. So I had to leave that job, decided not to pursue sign language because I wanted to move back home and kind of see if I could figure out this facilitation thing. And a friend of mine who I met when I went back home, he's a facilitator, and he told me about this 1-day workshop on graphic facilitation. And
Mm.
I was like, that sounds interesting.
Yeah.
And that was 10 years ago, and the rest is history, as cliche as it sounds.
And so now you're literally the graphic recorder. So what? Maybe we unpack. What does that mean? What is a graphic recorder?
Yeah, so terms are a funny thing, like I said earlier, but when I was introduced into it, it was really around graphic facilitation.
Right.
Graphic recording is just another term you could call it. You can use it in a different way, but I'll just talk about graphic facilitation for a minute because that's sort of my journey.
Yeah.
So if you think about facilitation and when you're in a room helping a group of people move through the strategic planning or brainstorming or visioning, it's really about the voices in the room. So when you're doing graphic facilitation, instead of solely feeding back in words, now you're feeding back in pictures. So when I'm in a room, it's a gigantic piece of paper, usually on a wall, 4 feet by 8, 10, 12, 16 feet long. And with my big fancy markers, I'm illustrating what I'm hearing in that meeting. So someone says something, then someone else says something else, and then I can tie ideas together and represent them in a visual way. Graphic recording is just more of a it's a bit more common of a term than graphic facilitation, I would say. And I like to use that word when I'm describing when I do like conferences and presentations and things like that, where I'm not involved in a process, like a facilitated process. I'm more of like a fly on a wall kind of thing. So yeah, those are kind of mostly the two worlds. And I've another kind of common terms, because we're just talking about terms here, is live illustration. I see as kind of an umbrella term that is a bit more of a friendly one that is like less complex to explain to people. It's a little bit more like, Google friendly live illustration.
Right.
Yeah.
While we're on the terms, then let's jump into the term that you've really popularized, I guess, sketchnoting. What is sketchnoting as a deviation from graphic recording, graphic facilitation, or is it somehow a subset?
It is a bit of a subset. It's used more commonly for people who want to do personal note taking. Right. So it's all, for me anyways, the way that I teach it and the way I work, it's all relatively the same skill set. It's listening, it's making sense of what you're hearing, and it's capturing. But when I'm doing it professionally for organizations and businesses and conferences, I'm listening as a whole. I'm really trying to take out bias. I'm really trying to be present with like everything that's happening and trying to reflect for people, where sketchnoting is more, I'm reflecting for myself. It's for my own personal learning. Yeah, and I didn't coin the term sketchnoting. A guy did named Mike Rohde back in 2006. But the concept of sketchnoting has been around for a very long time. It's just us and our funny terms. The other way I like to also describe it is visual note taking, but I feel like that doesn't always fully describe what it is. So I think sketchnoting is a nice happy medium that and sometimes people call me a sketchnoter when I'm working professionally. And that's okay. Like, I don't have the opportunity to go into all of the details, but if that's how they relate to me as a professional, I'm like, it doesn't matter to me. It's okay.
But I think that distinction is quite nice. So one is more holistic. That's the graphic recording or the graphic facilitation. Then one is something you do yourself, which then would lead to another term that I'm guessing some people may confuse between sketchnoting and doodling. Is there a distinction?
Yeah, so doodling, I feel, can be a very beautiful stepping stone into sketchnoting, because doodling does what people think the opposite. Like, how do I say this? It's the opposite of what people think. So folks think that doodling is a distraction. You're not paying attention, whereas actually doing the opposite. Right. Sunny Brown, the author of The Doodle Revolution, has this beautiful TED Talk. It's like, she's like, talks a mile a minute. It's only like 8 minutes long or something. She talks about redefining what a doodle means and how it's meaningless marks to help yourself think. And I really love that kind of new definition around it. And it can help you remember up to 29% more information, right? So the doodle can be a very powerful tool to help us focus and learn, even though people think it's doing the opposite. So the way that I see doodling is that it can be this beautiful stepping stone to sketchnoting, where you can take your doodles and make them more purposeful, right? Make them like work for you a little bit more. So if you're going to be doodling anyways, then why not incorporate some just real basic drawing elements and sketchnoting principles to help use those doodles in a way that is related to the content. Whereas most of the time when people doodle, it doesn't really have anything to do with what's actually happening or what's actually being said. So why not? You're gonna be doodling anyway, so might as well just add that into a sketchnoting type vibe. Yeah,
that's a great clarification, and I'm clear now. Hopefully our listeners are clear as well. But if you're now coming to a potential client, how do you position yourself? How do you describe the service that you offer to get them interested?
Yeah, so the work is an experienced good, and which makes the sales process a little bit extra challenging, right? Like most people know they need a website, or most people know they need to feed their family. Like there's not a hard sell of like things you need to buy sometimes in the world. But the way that graphic recording, all of this works is people really need to understand and experience the value of it to understand the value, right? So it does make that sales process a little bit more challenging because I can show graphics. I've got thousands at this point of examples that I could show you all day long. We could talk about it all day long.
Yeah.
But until you're in the room and you say something and that is drawn on the wall with a picture and you go, oh, I feel heard. Oh, I see how those are connected now. Oh, like your learning is deepened there. You're understanding the clarity. Right. It's hard to describe on a sales call what that feels like, you know? So most of the time, the people that I tend to work with have experienced it, either for myself or someone else. They're like, oh, I didn't know what that was called, but now I know. And like, let's work together. Right. So it is a bit of a funny thing because of that experience, that if it's missing, people certainly have hired me, but I do feel like they thought they were taking a risk. It's a little risky. They're like, oh, we're going to hire this like artist girl. She's going to like draw a picture. I don't know what she's going to do, but she's going to do a thing. And like, let's throw some money at it, see what happens. Right. You don't find as many people who are willing to take that risk. And in my early days, I had a couple people do that. And I am like so incredibly grateful to them for doing that and taking that risk. But it's, it definitely is leaning in on the cliche of a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? Like if they can see it and experience the value for themselves, it makes my job as a salesperson way easier, because then I can just talk about, even if they can't describe what they loved about it, then now that I know that they have experienced it, I can, maybe it was because of this, or this is the way people think, or this is how people feel, or this is the accessibility piece. And, I can kind of lean in on some things that to help them articulate. But it is very funny when I get on calls, they're like, oh my gosh, it's so cool. That's usually what I get, like, oh my gosh, what you do is so cool. And I'm like, it is cool. It is very fascinating to see someone be drawing live in real time in front of your eyes exactly what's being said. Like there is this, there is the cool factor, and I understand that, but I make it very clear to people who want to work with me that I am not the entertainment. It is entertaining, sure, I get it, like it is. And when people say, oh, I watched you the whole time, I'm like, that's great, because you're still paying attention, you're still learning, right? It's not about the entertainment at all. It's really about, do you want people to feel heard and seen? Do you want to elevate your message? Do you want to have something to help people engage in the moment, and then have this thing that you can have afterwards to do whatever you want with? I've been really talking about the neurodiverse aspect of it lately, where we have such a high expectation on people to sit there for 8 hours, right? And if you can't physically or mentally sit there for 8 hours, you're going to miss out on the content, and that's not cool, right? So how can you add in this element where it does have a nice visual aspect to it. Now you have like a gallery that you have in your conference.
Yes.
But it's really about that learning. So I am a bit particular in who I work with, because I find the people who just want to work with me for the entertainment factor, they're treating me not as a communication expert, which is what I am, right? I'm there to help people learn and engage.
Yeah.
And sometimes that means the picture isn't pretty, because if you are in a meeting and the conversation is messy, sometimes the drawing is a little messy. You know what? Usually it's pretty decent, but sometimes like it's not this big polished beautiful illustration, and people have to be okay with that because it has to serve the group, right? And if I focus on the aesthetics sometimes in meetings that are extremely complicated and complex, it's not actually going to serve the group if I just focus on making sure it looks pretty all the time.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
You've opened up so many questions in my mind.
Okay. I'll stop talking for a minute.
There's about 10 paths I can go right down. The first thing is, when I was listening to you, you're primarily doing in-person drawing, like in the event itself, or are you also doing virtual?
Great question. So I have a pre-COVID and post-COVID life, that's for sure. Pre-COVID, I was 100% in person.
Yeah.
Now I am more like 85% digital, maybe even higher, maybe 90%. So yeah, so I really had to pivot very quickly, figure out how am I going to continue my business through this, because I do feed my family on this work. So it's pretty important to keep going. And I couldn't let a little thing called a pandemic slow me down. So it's like, okay, let's figure this out. So luckily I have a lot of client base in tech, and they kept me, like those first few months through the pandemic, they really kept me going. Without them, it would have been pretty rough. So yeah, they, a lot of people were just happy for me to be like, instead of a Zoom screen and seeing me here, you'd see in the beginning, it's just a big white space.
Yeah.
Right. And then you see every little mistake I make, every little word I spell wrong, I have to fix, you get to see it all. Right. So it was a really nice, beautiful way to be able to work with more clients in a way that also is accessible to people. So like I do have some people that even though they're back in person, they're still keeping a virtual element because they realized with the pandemic how important it is.
Right.
And the virtual people get to see the drawing, and then they take my screen and project it on a screen in the room. So it's just as good as me being there, if not better. Like there's pros and cons to like paper versus digital. The paper is like beautiful because it's like very tactile and just so different and unique. But, you can only make it so big. So when people project it in the room, they can project it on any size they want. So that's kind of a nice thing. And I'll usually get like DMs when I'm working, and they're like, "Are you here? Where are you? Are you at the conference? What's happening?" So it doesn't mean I have to be there necessarily, as long as we have the tech set up. So yeah, it's, that's more so for like conferences and that kind of stuff. But I'm mostly in person when it comes to these more facilitated things. I have done some online over the last couple of years, but usually when I'm doing these more, conversations where people are contributing, it's a little bit more difficult to do it on a Zoom call. Like I said, though I did in those early days of COVID. Because people didn't necessarily have a choice, but it definitely is impactful to be there in person in those situations. So, and I tend to do those a little bit more locally these days. But yeah.
Very good. I guess it opened the world to you, essentially through the virtual applications. So now you've got a broader audience, a potentially broader customer base, and you can alter
Mhm.
your mistakes, I guess, right? In digital
Oh
form,
yeah.
you can rub out things. Yeah. So,
It's it's definitely more like I have tips and tricks and things that I can do to fix something if I make a mistake on paper, but
okay.
digital is yeah, it is a whole other ball game. It is so awesome to be able to change things, to move things around on the fly. That's for sure. Yeah.
Right. So, as a facilitator myself, I'm really very conscious of the power of the visual graphic that you're talking about, and what that offers. But I'm curious, what sort of feedback do you get from your clients or the participants at the end of an event? Like they've seen it, they've witnessed it, they've experienced it themselves.
Mhm.
Is there any sort of short expression that you could share, or you receive that sort of summarizes the value that they
Mm.
see in what you?
Yeah, well, the first thing that came to my head was, "Wow." That's what I tend to get. "Wow." They're like, "I know we watched you create it, but look."
Yeah,
It's this funny thing. They watch it being created, but then at the end they're like, "Oh my gosh, you just
yeah,
created that." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know. You were here, don't you remember?" Um yeah, so, I think at the end, people it is really it's so fascinating to me because there's the impact in the moment and then there's the after, right? So the impact in the
yeah.
moment, that's I'm just getting feedback throughout. And when I'm in a room with people, I like to engage people in the process as much as possible.
Okay.
I usually introduce it at the beginning and I say, there's always one of you in every room that likes to correct people's spelling. You can do that. You can tell me if I spell something wrong, just more as a joke. But I want people to come up and say, "Oh, can you add this in? Can you add that in?" Like I did one back a few months ago. It was a big project. It was three days long.
Wow.
And there was indigenous communities from all across in Canada. So they all speak different languages, right? So they wanted some of their own language in it. So they would write on a sticky note, a translation of something, and then I would put that in, right? So, you know,
Awesome.
I it's in those situations, like it shouldn't necessarily be about me and what I'm doing. I want people to interact with me. So
Mm,
there's that in the moment. But I think at the end, other than wow, it's amazing, what I usually get, I think, is those wheels are starting to turn a little bit for people. It's like, now what? Because at the end of the meeting, usually that's where you should be moving towards. Okay, this work doesn't stop here. Now what? Now what are we going to do?
yeah.
And so I really try to, I do provide like a document to my clients of over the years, I've just collected different ways that people tell me how they used it after an event.
Mm,
And I feel like my clients weren't potentially using it to, its ability. Like
yeah.
sometimes I get it. Like you're after an event, you're exhausted and you're like, that's over.
Sure, sure.
Let's move on. And it's like, no, like make sure you share these graphics out, put them on your social media, put them
Yeah,
on your website, as long as it's not confidential. Stick the original or print a copy, stick it in your office, give
yes.
copies to them, give people postcards. Like, there's not just the marketing aspect of it. If it's a conference, like show it to your sponsors, show
Yeah.
them to people who might want to come next year. Like there's all of that. But then there's the accountability piece. So
Mm,
when you're especially when you're in those facilitated tape sessions, it's, hey, this is what we said we were going to do. We're going to post it in the
yep,
break room,
yep.
or we're going to have we're going to look at it at the beginning of our next meeting, or we're going to start every meeting by looking at this graphic and be like, all right, we said this was our vision and mission, or we said these were our values. How are we expressing those? Or
Mm,
these were the action items we said we were going to do. Like, how are we doing with those? Right? Because the alternative most of the time is a written report that gets like put in a drawer,
mhm,
oftentimes never to be seen again.
yep.
Right. Whereas the visual, because now like keep the conversation moving. And
Yes.
I've even had clients tell me that they use it to tell people when they're not going to do something,
Mm,
because in that meeting they said, oh, we're going to do this thing. And then after the meeting, they went back and did their research and like, actually, we can't do that thing. But it gives this conduit and this soft place to have a conversation instead of just sending a mass email and saying, we can't do that thing. In the next meeting, you have the graphic and you point at it and you're like, we actually researched this. It's not going to happen. This is why. Right? Because oftentimes when people, especially if you're like an employee and you're giving feedback, it's just going into the abyss. And you're like, did they even hear me? Like maybe they did research it and you can't do it. But there's not always the best communication channel to be able to tell that employee, oh yeah, that idea you had, we can't do it. But if it's represented on a graphic that now you can bring back, and it's like constant reminder of those ideas. Yeah.
One of the areas that I like this type of application for is, as facilitators, we know that we need to chunk our information, but also then make the link between the pieces of information, and the visual graphics, particularly the ones that I've seen that you've drawn, create that connection between the different topics and the different items that were important to remember. So you're forming that bridge for them, that when they then come back and look at it again at the end of the event or after the event, it's like that memory jog. It provides that knowledge retention, deepening, and a whole raft of different things. So I'm a huge fan of this approach. So if I ever get the opportunity, you'll get a phone call. You've got a great YouTube channel. I just want to give a shout out to anyone listening. If anyone wants to, has an interest in going down this path and learning how to do this visual graphic, as leaders, as facilitators of workshops, events, check out Ashton's YouTube channel. Actually, it's not under your name, right? It's under your company's name. So Mind Eye's Creativity, Mind's Eye.
Yeah. I actually just changed it maybe since you checked, but everything sketchnoting related is under Sketchnote School. So I actually changed my YouTube channel to Sketchnote School.
Thank you for clarifying that. I saw that.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
I was confused. Where did that come from? Okay, now, all right. But on there, you do a series of very short reels, where you demonstrate how to draw one image. And I love it. It's so fascinating just watching you. Of course, it's sped up in time, but it looks so simple watching you do it.
Right.
And I think for people that have an interest, it gives a framework of clarity. If I looked at the one that had the most views of all your reels, I think it's 5,500 views or something. It was of the virus, right? So you had a simple diagram of a virus, and we see the graphic images on the internet, and there it is. Here's how you draw it. So simple, right? And so I really like this approach that you have with educating through YouTube. So nice work.
Yeah.
What I'm fascinated by, though, is if I put myself in your position, now I'm thinking as a leader, I want to get into this graphic design, excuse me, or graphic recording, as you call it, or even graphic facilitating. If I'm the leader as the facilitator, apart from where do I start to learn how to do this? The actual presence of knowing I have a blank canvas. You're going to start talking about a topic. Where do I start? Where do I put the pen on the canvas that's going to be relevant by the time this whole session is finished? How do you, is this just a practiced skill that you develop, or do you have some prior knowledge going into the workshop that we're going to be talking about these areas in general? And how do you know? Or is that a trade secret you don't want to share?
It's definitely not a trade secret, but it is definitely one that is hard to answer. So I'll try my best. So oftentimes, like so all I know going into it is maybe the title of a presentation or the theme of the meeting, and maybe who's there.
Wow.
So for conferences, it's very like, I know nothing, absolutely nothing. Like all I know is the title and the name of the person who's talking. That's it, and then the theme, like, is it cybersecurity? Is it medical? Like, I don't know, whatever.
Yeah.
So, but in graphic facilitation, ideally, I'm involved in the process of the agenda. At least, like in a perfect world scenario, I at least have one meeting under my belt before the actual meeting that I can add in some of my own thoughts. I can contribute. I like to play a more active role, as much of an active role as I can, so I'm a part of the team. And I find when I'm not a part of the team, I don't feel as connected, and it's harder for me to do my job, right? Like when things have to change at lunch break, like, oh, the direction's going this way, we're going to change the agenda. Like, I'd like to know that, I'd like to know. I like to be in those little side meetings are kind of important. And I've been in situations where people didn't invite me to that side meeting, and I'm like, I should be there. Like, I'm part of the team, right? So I don't like being an add-on in those situations. There has to be a very specific reason why I'm there. Everyone knows it. And I'm part of trying to help you get to that goal, right? So as earlier on in the process I can be involved, the better. And sometimes, a lot of times, to be honest with you, it's very like, oh crap, we forgot to invite the graphic facilitator. Try to find one. And then I get this email like, can you come on Thursday? And I'm like, maybe, no, I don't know. So,
sure.
So that does help answer that question a little bit. If I know, if I'm in a graphic facilitation setting, if I have a concept of what are the activities, how are the questions going to be asked, what is the flow, like, if it's a half a day, let's say, and there's 3 main things, I'm like, okay, 3 main things. Don't use the whole paper in the first third, right? Like, or make sure you got extra. You can throw some extra on a wall. Like, I have to think about my setup. Can I throw extra paper on a wall? Like, usually I just bring my own walls, just like boards and stands, and I can just throw up a wall, like on a lunch break or at a little break. So I have to take some of those things, like the setup has to be considered, and how much, like sometimes I won't even really worry about the space I'm using, because I know I can just add a bunch of paper, right? Because I don't want to stifle and not capture things because I don't have as much of a canvas space as I would like, right? So you kind of have to navigate your physical space when you're in the room, how much and what the agenda looks like and things like that. So it can give you some clues into how to capture what to capture, where to start, and things like that. Whereas a conference presentation, a lot of times, like they're usually no more than an hour, and you have an hour, right? And now I've done it so long, you kind of get this general sense of how to use your space. But maybe they're supposed to talk for an hour and they only talk for 25 minutes. That's happened lots of times. And I usually don't capture Q&As because it's not the presentation, which is what they wanted. So then I'm like, if I'm doing digitally, it's great because I'm like, I'll just add in an extra drawing here and I'll just make this bigger. Like, it's like, I'll just change some things around and see, but the organizers know, like, the person ended early. Like, I can only do what I can do. You know what I mean? Like, if it's half empty, it's half empty. It is what it is. So kind of depends on the situation I'm in and all of that in terms of how to navigate my space and things like that. But it's, so it is a hard question to answer because there's so many factors involved when it comes to how much information I know ahead of time in the scenario that I'm in.
But I guess for any listeners out there that are thinking about engaging with a graphic facilitator, the more information you can share up front, the better the outcome is probably going to be.
So I actually prefer not knowing anything when it comes to when it comes to graphic recording. Graphic facilitation is different because I want to be a part of the team, and I do have to know because graphic facilitation, it's still like totally up in the air because you don't know what people are going to say.
Yes.
Right. You just plan your questions and how you're going to do your sessions and stuff, but like anything could happen. Right. Whereas, so yes, I'm involved, but I still no one knows what's going to happen really. But in graphic recording, I actually prefer, sometimes people offer like, do you want the PowerPoint slides? And I always say no. And there is an element of risk that I take every time I do that because I don't know what the speakers are like. Is it their first time on stage? Are they going to talk super fast because they're nervous? Like, I don't know what the vibe is going to be. Okay. But I say no because I don't want to be distracted thinking about what I think they're going to say based on a PowerPoint that's probably not great because most PowerPoints are awful.
Yes.
Or am I going to be present and even if their PowerPoint is awful, I'm just listening to their words.
Right.
Right. So like I did one the other day and I didn't look at a single slide. Like, sometimes I'll look like, I caught the first two words, but I didn't catch the last word. Did they put it on the slide? Okay, cool. They did. That's great. Sometimes it's to help, make sure that I, if I miss tiny little things like that, but it shouldn't be what I'm leaning on. In a perfect world, there's certainly many situations I had to heavily lean on a PowerPoint because it was just a hot mess, but it's trying to be as present as possible and to eliminate as many distractions as possible. I have to take out the thought process of what I think they're going to be presenting rather than what they're actually presenting, which can be two completely different things.
Right. Let's move a little bit into the area. Let's say that I'm a leader, I'm listening to this conversation, and I'm interested in introducing this into my arsenal, my toolkit of impact, if you like, to try and create more impact, influence as a leader when I'm running meetings, running events, workshops. You've recently released a book which is called Beginner's Guide to Sketchnoting. I'm not sure how long ago that was, last year or this year, but
no, just a couple months ago. Months ago. Yeah.
Yeah. And it is what it says, I guess. It's a beginner's guide for people to learn the art of how to do this better. So
right.
That's one side. You've got your YouTube channel, which is very educational and useful. On the other side, I can imagine some people like myself prefer the live engagement. So I'm wondering, do you offer anything, like do you have a program or a training that you're currently offering, or is there something in the pipeline perhaps?
Yeah, so I am a bit of a minimalist. So I try to take that concept into my business as well. And I did have a course for a while called Sketchnote All Things. But I decided back in this spring when I was getting ready to release the book that I really missed working with people to help them develop these skills. So I decided to put everything under the umbrella of the Sketchnote School, and I have an online community.
Right.
So it's a membership community. You can sign up for a month or 6 months or whatever you want. And that is this safe space where people can just share their not so nice sketch notes. People are always like, it's not good, but here it is. Right. And, for feedback and for support and for cheerleading. So, it's this beautiful space where people can kind of share what they're working on and ask the questions and get answers from me and from other people in the community. And we have like live calls. I do workshops in there. I have guest speakers. I have guest interviews. We did a guest interview this week. And those are particular people who are a bit more new in their sketchnoting journey. So people, because oftentimes what I was struggling with is that people would see my work or other people who've been doing it for a really long time, and it's so far away.
Yep.
Like when you call it, like there's the beginner's gap, it's so far on the other end. They go, oh, well, I could never like draw like Ashton. So why not? I'm not even going to try. Right. So the guest interviews that I have are people that are a bit more early on. Like I have someone coming up in a couple weeks and he literally just started like 2 months ago.
Okay.
Right. So be like, what have I learned in those first 2 months that would be helpful to another beginner? Right. So it's really trying to support people and provide an opportunity where they get access to me and my knowledge, but then also the support from a community. And it's been, it's been quite a learning opportunity to kind of be building this thing as it goes. And I've got courses in there. I have a new course coming out next week in the community. So everything kind of just like lives in there.
Yeah, that sounds extremely useful. As I said, Ashton, at the very beginning, this is such a fascinating field, and it creates that potential to really amplify the impact of the leader if they use this well themselves. Is there anything, I'm conscious of the time and we're coming close to wrap up, so is there anything that we haven't covered in our conversation that you really want to share?
Yeah, well, I just want to comment on like the leader part. So, whatever you want to call it, you can learn the basic drawing elements to help you. So if you're facilitating a meeting or you're the one in the front of the room, you can use the sketchnoting principles on a flip chart or on a whiteboard, right? And it's really about basic drawing skills, right? Like in the first thing, after talking about some lettering and writing words, because that's pretty important in the book, the first drawing element that I introduce is a line, right? And you can use a line to do many things, to connect ideas, to show flow of information, to separate information, to highlight information, right? So if you just learn these basic and practice drawing some lines and then turn that line into an arrow and turn that line into a square, you can actually create very nice looking visuals that aren't just nice looking, but are very impactful in that meeting to help elevate that information. So like lines and arrows and squares, it's like not rocket science, right? And like the skill set, like one of the reasons why I really wanted to put the book together was to try to make entry into this as like non-threatening, low barrier to entry as possible, because it is not complicated, right? And it's not about like, yes, you can elevate and expand into actual drawings and icons. And, I touch on that at the very end of the book. Right. But the first part is really like building your foundation to just have these really simple drawing elements and redefining what drawing is and what sketchnoting is, which is just to help you communicate, to help you think, right? It's not about trying to create a beautiful piece of art. So when you're facilitating a meeting or you're at the front of the room, you're on a Zoom call and you pull up a whiteboard or a piece of paper, right? Just having that like in your toolbox, like you said earlier, of like, oh, I can draw a line. I've drawn a line before and I know I can draw a line to help connect these two ideas. Boom, done. Like, so it's not, and I think, when I have these types of conversations with someone, I'm never really surprised when people says, oh yeah, I was in a meeting 10 years ago and the CEO drew a picture. Like people remember these things.
Yes.
Right. It makes it so incredibly memorable. And it's not complicated to learn. Yeah. Right. As a leader, you don't have to be like, oh, now I have to spend all this time learning this skill. I designed the book in a way and like you could do all the exercises. If you're speedy, I guess, like fairly speedy, like you could read the whole book and do the exercises and draw your first sketch note in like an hour or two. Right. Like it doesn't have to be complicated and it doesn't have to be, we're not looking to create beautiful pieces of artwork. Yeah. Right. Yeah. We're drawing things to help people communicate and help people engage and help clarify information and deepen that conversation. So there's my mic drop for for today.
But Ashton, we can talk for hours about this because it is so powerful. And there's so many different ways that you can use it as a leader, as a facilitator. But in your case, you do it so beautifully, and you can explain it so elegantly. So, look, where can people go and connect with you if they have an interest to pursue this further?
Yeah, so if all things sketchnoting related, like want to learn how to sketchnote, that's sketchnote.school. Pretty easy. I've got some free stuff on there, my books on there, all the good things. And then my graphic recording business, it's mindseyecreative.ca. So if you want to see portfolio, examples of my work, you want to talk about a conference or a meeting you have coming up, that's all on Mind's Eye Creative.
All right, perfect. We'll make sure we link to all that in the show notes. But Ashton Rodenhiser, gosh.
You got it. You got it.
You must put that jinx on me. Ashton, thank you very much for being on the ET Project. Great to have the opportunity to connect. And I really hope that some listeners reach out and take up the fantastic service that you're bringing to the world. So much appreciated.
Thank you.
So what are you waiting for? Hit the subscribe button below and click on the bell icon so I can pop up in your feed occasionally with a great tip for your ultimate growth.